Welcome to Inside the Issues. My name is Amrit Singh. The clock is ticking in California because Friday is a crucial deadline in the race for governor. That is the last day for candidates to file paperwork to get onto the ballot for the June primary or forever hold their peace. You're going to take a look right here at the current field of major candidates. You might notice there are a lot of Democrats running. Party elites have taken notice of that too. In an open letter, the California Democratic Party Chair Rusty Hicks called on the lower polling Democrats to drop out and avoid the, quote, nightmare scenario of two Republicans advancing to the November general election. Remember, the top two vote getters, regardless of party in June, move on. Governor Gavin Newsom echoed that message. And today, we can say that message did not work. Most of those candidates, like Tony Thurmond, Betty Yee, Javier Becerra, promptly filed to have their names put on the ballot. But one Democrat did drop out, just not one that most folks knew was running. Ian Calderon, who took himself out of contention and then did this.
And that includes, hold on, getting a FaceTime here.
Hey Eric, what's up, man? It's Ian.
Hey Ian, what's up?
Look, we've got to come together now to make life more affordable in this state. There are too many pressing problems, and we need a new generation of leadership ready to govern on day one. So what do you say we do it together? I want to endorse you for governor of California. Let's get it done.
Ian, I'm so honored.
So can you believe the luck of Team Swalwell to have cameras around to catch that very real and authentic FaceTime message between the two? How much does Calderon's exit change things ahead of that June primary? According to data analyst Paul Mitchell's calculations, really not much. The chance of two Republicans going on to November is now at 25%. It was at 27% before Calderon dropped out. And general polling had Calderon in the very low single digits. That explains some of that. But now we have new polling on how Latino voters are feeling about the race. A new David Binder poll for the Working Class Latino Project has Republican Chad Bianco in the lead with 20%, followed by three Democratic candidates. But we got to say 43% of those who were polled are still undecided. And so it creates a very interesting conversation, one which we'll continue to follow and have some conversations on just a little later in the show. Now, since the war began in Iran, 6 U.S. service members have lost their lives, one of whom was from Sacramento. President Donald Trump says that number could rise as the fighting continues. Marissa Rhea now reports that concerns that families have are all over what we're seeing.
He says he's safe.
Words of relief. Vanessa is a Thousand Oaks mom whose son is active duty Air Force and is currently deployed in the Middle East as war continues. She's showing us messages from her son, providing updates that he is safe.
At that moment, my anxiety goes away.
Vanessa says she caught wind of the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran Saturday right away.
Yeah, that was very frightening. Needless to say, I didn't sleep the entire night.
Vanessa chose not to disclose her last name or the identity of her son due to security concerns. She says her family is living with intense anxiety as tensions escalate in the Middle East, never knowing who is safe.
I just lay in bed and I can't turn my mind off. I can't stop the thoughts like, what if this happens? I'm so worried for everybody, and especially my son.
Iran cannot outlast us.
On Wednesday, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth expressed confidence in the United States' capabilities.
Ultimately, we set the pace and the tempo. The enemy is off balance, and we're going to keep them off balance. And we know their ability to shoot versus our ability to defend.
As of Thursday, 6 service members have lost their lives, including Chief Warrant Officer Robert Marzan of Sacramento. Vanessa and Ventura veteran Paragon say they are mourning their loss.
All the way from World War II, Vietnam, Japan.
As Paragon with the local Ventura VFW shows us around, he shares his thoughts on the current conflict. As a Ventura County combat veteran serving in Beirut during the embassy bombing in 1983 and 1984, Paragon says he knows the consequences of war well and says he's concerned for those currently overseas.
Well, I'm 64 and I served when I was in my 20s, and I still suffer to this day from PTSD. There are times where I can't have people walk behind me because I feel fear.
Those consequences are one of several reasons Paragon says he doesn't think the U.S. should be in this war, though he wants those currently in active duty to know he and others support them.
We're here for you and you're never going to be forgotten.
For Vanessa, she says she's going through a range of emotions, saying she supports this mission. She believes it will make America and the Middle East safer.
It's a mixture between terror and intense pride. I'm so extremely proud of my brave son.
Both Vanessa and Paragon hope this war ends and our military can return home soon.
That is a conversation that is happening around the world. It's in Washington, D.C. as well. Meanwhile, in California, we're still talking about the governor's race. When we come back, we'll have a conversation with Melanie Mason of Politico all about it. Stay with us. Well, poll after poll shows the race for California governor is wide open. Let's talk about that crowded contest and the heartburn it's giving Democrats with Melanie Mason, Politico's California bureau chief and Playbook co-author. Melanie, it's great to have you. Congratulations on your glow up at Politico, much deserved. And you've been writing about this and covering this in Playbook all along, so let's talk about it. What is going on in this governor's race?
I mean, it's really remarkable because I can think back a couple of months ago when I was having conversations with Democratic strategists and we were saying, look, there's no clear frontrunner. There's a million Democrats running. Is it possible that 2 Republicans can advance into the top 2? And what I heard back then was the odds of that are so low. I mean, it's not going to happen. And I think what we've seen is that, fast forward several months and there's still a million Democrats running. There's still no clear frontrunner. And now there is actual panic among Democratic leaders that they could face an embarrassing lockout in June, which you would see something extraordinary, which is in a deep blue state like California, 2 Republicans making it to the general election.
Yeah, and this conversation about, and you heard Governor Newsom say, I don't want to put my thumb on the scale too early, but I might have to soon. So maybe there's this idea of letting the process play out. But it also just begs the question, how did Democrats let this happen? I mean, no succession plan, really.
Well, I think that is absolutely part of it. I mean, you have this sort of larger-than-life figure, Gavin Newsom, who's been governor for 8 years. And the truth is that he doesn't necessarily have a clear successor. He's never really had a political family of, I think, people he'd point to say, this is who I'm mentoring, this is who I want to come up after me. So there was no clear real succession plan. And the other thing is that, look, the party is not like it was back in the day. This is not machine politics. They can't get everybody into a smoke-filled room and sort of, crack some heads and say, let's get real. You have a chance and you don't. That's just not how the party works anymore. All of this power is so diffuse, it's so decentralized. And so for any of these Democrats that are running, I think they're all thinking to themselves, why not me? Why don't I have the opportunity to make this run? And so you have a little bit of a almost prisoner's dilemma, right? Where everybody is making their own self-interested decision, and that could end up damaging the party's good as a whole.
And exactly as you say, given the idea that this party apparatus doesn't have the power that it did, we see Rusty Hicks, the California Dem Party chair, send this open letter, and essentially people immediately respond with all kinds of responses. But the most unanimous one seems to be, actually, we're filing our papers to go. And one person drops out, Ian Calderon, polling at the very low single digits. But how surprising was it that ultimately Rusty Hicks' letter was met with this sort of reception?
I think it really says something that it was even hours, not even hours after this letter went public, that you had some of the lower polling candidates like Betty Yee and Tony Thurmond say, actually, we are going to file. I mean, I think that is a real sort of sign as to how they view the party chair, the party apparatus. And in some ways, you could argue that this backfired a lot on the state party chair. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that that letter, maybe that was the first public sign of the conversations that were going on, but it's reflective of a lot of conversations that have been going on privately as well. So, it may have been that Rusty Hicks had to sort of stick his neck out there to send this message publicly, but clearly these private conversations have not been working either. I think that it has been very, very hard for California leaders, whether it's in the party itself or in influential groups, to convey to these folks, it's time to look in the mirror and have a real conversation about what your viability is.
And it also creates this moment where Tony Thurmond, the state superintendent of public instruction here in California, offers this message in retort that says essentially this is the California Democratic Party telling the candidates of color to drop out because they're the ones that are largely the ones that are polling in the single digits. And California GOP chair Corinne Rankin jumps all over this. And we could talk about Matt Mahan also polling in the single digits, Ian Calderon who dropped out. But how does this rattle out, and does this in some way backfire on the Democrats the way that the Republicans jumped on it?
I mean, it's pretty incendiary, especially in a state as diverse as California. If you have a candidate that's saying it's the candidates of color that are being singled out here. And the truth is that we should fact check this. I mean, that is not true in the strictest sense, right? Because the chair wrote this letter to every Democratic candidate. But it does happen to be that the candidates that are polling the lowest are the ones that are from these diverse backgrounds. And I think that that is a real sort of wake-up call moment for the California Democratic Party that likes to think of itself as the party of multiculturalism, of diversity. It's clear that these candidates are having a hard time breaking out and resonating with the larger electorate. Now, is that the fault of the party chair specifically? Is it fair to say that he's trying to force out candidates of color? I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but I do think that it's pretty telling that we're in this moment where you had this large, diverse field. And what's most likely is that the three top runners right now are all white people. Two of them are white males. And I think it goes to show perhaps how hard it is for some of these candidates of more diverse backgrounds, how hard it is for them to become these statewide figures.
Yeah, and speaking of statewide figures, it's so interesting. There was this QED post or article that you may have seen that basically posited, look, for 80 years, there's been a pretty surefire way to get yourself to the governor's mansion. That is to become a statewide elected figure. And in this moment, we're seeing that maybe change a little bit. They say, look, AG used to stand essentially for aspiring governor. Attorney General had become governors often in the past. Now we're seeing, Becerra not really polling that well. And in fact, the people and Democrats who are polling in the top tier, aside from, as Tony Thurmond would point out, being white, they are people who made their bones on a national stage, or at least not the ones on a state level stage. What do you think of that sort of take on what we're seeing play out in California politics?
I mean, I think it's very perceptive, and I do think that it sort of reflects the nationalization of the politics here in California and, quite frankly, across the country. I mean, it used to be that you would have these regional candidates that would be able to build up their base, not just across the state overall, but in places like the Bay Area or in Los Angeles, and that would usually be enough to power them forward. But when you think of politics today, if you're asking any person, they're going to think about what's going on in Washington, D.C. And so people like Representative Eric Swalwell, former Representative Katie Porter, they have become famous because they're on cable news all the time, teeing off against President Trump. And it feels like so long as the political discussion in the state is so focused on what's happening nationally, you're going to have the situation where it's these federal figures, these nationalized figures that are going to have a leg up.
Yeah, and KQED made the further point to everything that you're saying, Melanie, that it's also a reflection perhaps of the state of local journalism versus, again, the nationalization of all these conversations and therefore the attention economy as well. And before I let you go, we've been talking a lot about what it might mean to have these candidates of color polling where they are. There's also polls of voters of color, in particular Latino voters from this David Binder poll, showing that 40% undecided and Republican at the top with 20%. What does this poll tell you? I know you spoke to Latino voting expert Mike Madrid for this too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways it's a wake-up call for the two prominent Latino candidates still in the race, these two Democrats, Javier Becerra and Antonio Villaraigosa, because, look, they represent the largest plurality ethnic group in the state, and I think that they felt like there is a pathway for a Latino candidate to land into the top two. But what we're seeing from these results is that Latino voters are not necessarily gravitating towards Latino candidates, that having a Latino surname is not necessarily going to secure for you the Latino vote. And in fact, if you sort of combine the support of Becerra and Villaraigosa, that still wouldn't be enough to get them into the top two based on this poll. And so I think that it sort of shows that that the assumption that voters are going to sort of ascribe to their ethnic groups or to their gender groups. I mean, Katie Porter is having a kind of tough time with women voters right now. I think that it shows that voters are not only considering those descriptors when they're thinking of what candidates they want to back. And I think that that is a big wake-up call for these Latino candidates going forward.
Yeah, and it shows how deeply scrambled things are right now with this governor's race. Filing deadline tomorrow. I know you'll continue to be very busy. Thank you so much for all coming on the show and for all the work you're doing on the Politico Playbook for California. It's amazing stuff. It's great to see you rise. Great to have you here, Melanie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, as always. Melanie Mason. really pointing out what we're seeing in this governor's race, and it's something we're going to keep our eyes on, obviously, with this filing deadline and so much more up ahead. More coming up on the show, too. Stay with us. We'll be right back. San Francisco and Los Angeles are preparing for the FIFA World Cup happening in less than 100 days. The matches are expected to bring millions of dollars worth of economic activity to California, but the war in Iran is raising some concerns about security at the World Cup. Nikki Kay has more.
Lifelong soccer fan and Galaxy season ticket holder Aaron Levinson has always loved the game for its ability to bring people together.
It just connects me to my family, connects me to friends, and people I wouldn't meet otherwise.
Because of pricing, he hasn't bought tickets for the rapidly approaching World Cup. And while he wouldn't miss a chance to go to a game, he cannot ignore the backdrop of what's happening around the world.
If tickets fell in my lap or they came really cheap, I would definitely go to the games. I would, maybe the concern of safety might be on the back of my mind.
The World Cup will be one of the largest security operations ever conducted in North America.
Rick Crawford is a crisis management expert, and looking at the current geopolitical landscape, he says hosting a World Cup means security preparations must be elevated.
With the geopolitical issues that are going on globally and in here domestically at home, the threat level, we're in an increased level of threat.
But concerns have been raised by the 11 U.S. World Cup host cities, uncertain of when they'll receive their promised share of $625 million in federal security funding. Recently ousted Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem halted the disbursement of non-emergency FEMA grants during the partial government shutdown, saying the agency must prioritize disaster response. Her post on X reading in part, "The longer DHS goes without funding, the less prepared our nation will be for threats at the FIFA World Cup and America 250. Crawford says regardless of federal aid, host cities must prepare to the best of their capacities.
As I always say, is preparedness without politics. Preparedness should not be political. Communities have to prepare for major events and emergencies, whether federal funding is available or not. So something that actually has to happen. And unfortunately, until that gets solved, the event is still going to go on.
But both fans and experts have confidence in the local enforcement right here in Los Angeles.
It's a concern, but we have a great police force here in LA. LAPD is great, the Sheriff's Department's great, and they do a lot of counterterrorism training, I know. And so they're pretty up on it, and I know they've been preparing for this for a long time.
At the end of the day, safety at major events as local, police, fire, emergency management, hospitals have to build plans that work with the resources they already have. Funding certainly helps, but preparedness is really about discipline. Planning together, training together, and knowing exactly who's in charge when something happens.
A trust in the process and hope that with all eyes watching, the show that is the World Cup must go on.
Attorney General Rob Bonta is calling on the Trump administration to withdraw a question over citizenship in the 2030 census. Bonta called the effort unlawful and an attempt to politicize the count. Bonta and attorneys general from 21 other states submitted a letter to the U.S. Commerce Department calling for that change. Spring's almost here. You can feel it in the temperature a bit. That means popular destinations across California from Santa Barbara to Newport Beach are preparing for an influx of spring breakers. Cody Taylor now shows us some of those cities are putting some new rules in place to help with public safety.
During winter months, things can be slow in Newport Beach, and the same can be said for 15th Street Surf Shop. But Hank Rosenberger says that all changes when spring break hits.
Come in on a random Monday, there's people on the beach, it's 80 degrees out, all of our boards are gone, and it's just like a perfect sales day, great for business.
Hank's family owns the surf shop, and he says between spring break and summertime, his family makes 2/3 of their sales. Throughout the city, he says spring break can get a little crazy.
Depends where you are. There's Blackie's, which is kind of like the bar scene. You've got just like, young people drinking over there. Then you've got like 32nd Street, which I don't know if you've ever seen the videos, but kind of like a rave on the beach sometimes.
This year that could change as the city of Newport Beach recently voted unanimously to expand their safety enforcement zones to cover the Balboa Peninsula, West Newport, and Corona Del Mar. These zones triple fines for infractions like alcohol on the beach, illegal fireworks, and excessive noise during parts of March and April. For example, an open container violation would go from $100 to $300. And Lieutenant Garrick Little with the Newport Beach Police Department says in the past, short-term rentals or Airbnbs have been host to large gatherings that often cause problems in the city, but the ordinance cracks down on that.
Requires that the owner or the agent, as well as the person who the house is rented to, respond to the scene within 2 hours to help us deal with the problem if there's any unlawful activity at those homes.
Under the new ordinance, there'll be a one-strike revocation rule for short-term lodgers. And during the February 24th City Council meeting, Jeff Flint, the executive director of the Newport Beach Short-Term Rental Alliance, said this ordinance will have a negative impact on the 1,400 short-term renters that exist in the city.
And the guest themselves turns out to be a bad actor, will do something wrong, and you will impose a greater penalty on the property owner and the property management company who tried to do everything right than the guest who was the real bad actor.
As for 15th Street Surf Shop, Hank says as long as people still come by to rent beach gear, his family will be happy.
We love spring breakers when they come in because that kind of just bridges the gap, makes it just a great prep for summer.
Many businesses say they hope the ordinance doesn't deter spring breakers from visiting the city because, like 15th Street Surf Shop, they rely on that income every year.
Well, spring break is on its way, and April showers bring May flowers, and May brings us the budget revise, something we'll be thinking about in Sacramento. Much more of that news for you coming up after the break. It's LA City Hall, a place where there's lots of conversations about potentially reforming the city charter, also what's happening with the budget, also what's happening with the auditing and accounting. In fact, Thursday at LA City Hall, members of the Charter Reform Commission held a public hearing on whether to adjust some of these propositions and considers a series of police reform-related amendments. The commission's recommendations will eventually head to the City Council, which will decide whether they will end up on the November ballot for voters to then approve. It sounds kind of wonky and technical, but it is about the way LA City operates. And a recent report from the city's financial watchdog found rising liability payouts and falling revenues, which have put the city on an uncertain financial path, which will take some, quote, bold reforms to address, according to the report. The findings are part of the fiscal year 25 annual comprehensive financial report released by City Controller Kenneth Mejia. And Kenneth Mejia joins me right now in studio. Welcome back to the show, Kenneth. Great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
This report feels, and so often when we talk about things with the LA budget, it feels somewhat dire. Talk about the news that you broke here.
Sure. So we just released our annual comprehensive financial report for fiscal year 2025. And like you said, we unfortunately came up short in revenue, $160 million short. We also had overspending. The biggest area was liability payouts. The budget was $87 million. The city ended up paying $287 million. The largest share was police-related liabilities at $152 million. But just those were some of the things that we see is revenue not coming in as strong as we want, and also just a lot of spending and liabilities happening.
A lot of spending and a lot of overspending. And this is looking at the 24-25 fiscal year. We're looking at now what we can do about this moving forward as well. What do you see happening with this overspending? I mean, when the city overspends, it comes out of the general and reserve fund to some degree?
Sure. And over the last 2 fiscal years, because right now we are potentially hitting the 3rd fiscal year in a row of a budget deficit. Mm-hmm. And so what the city did and does is they would tap the reserve fund, which is like your emergency rainy day fund that you save when you have emergencies, or you will see some austerity measures that affect the people, right? You'll see departments get their hiring frozen. You'll see furloughs, unpaid days. You'll see the potentials of layoffs. And so what you'll notice as an Angelino, like, oh, there are not that many services, or they're not at the level it should be, or that's on hold because we need to save that money from this extra spending to cover this overspending, or cover that revenue shortfall, which is what you're seeing.
Yeah, and there's a requirement for that reserve fund to be at like 5%.
5% of the general fund, correct.
We've been at 4%.
Right? We're there. We're close. We're there right now, and so, but it's it's always tempting because of these shortfalls, or because of the overspending that there's a risk that we might tap it again.
Right, and then risks to the credit rating, and that creates all kinds of issues for the city in lots of ways too.
Correct, and in our ACFR report, we said 4 credit rating agencies gave us a negative outlook.
Right, and that is not ideal, obviously. And part of this, as you mentioned, is the revenues that haven't been quite what they expected, declining. Which revenue sources are we talking about that we saw some hits to?
Sure, and so when it came to the revenues, the city tends to budget higher, right, in certain aspects. So it could be a lot of your economic sensitive taxes, so things like your sales or things like your transient occupancy tax, like your hotel tax, areas like that where those are driven by the economy. And, for us in the past, my office has given more conservative estimates because it's better to be conservative and beat your estimates.
That's a good budget.
Actually, exactly. So, but actually for this fiscal year 2026, our projections for, as we head into the year end is that we're either going to be at budget or a little bit below, which is better than being short 160 million or 2 years ago we were short 220 million, right? But currently the city is on target to overspend over budget by over 200 million. So even if we're on budget with the revenues, the overspending still has that gap.
Well, a couple of the things you identified in your report were the port traffic being down 12%, which there was a lot of tariff uncertainty, which contributed to that. There was the entertainment industry, which we've seen and we've been talking about a lot with Hollywood production leaving. Also the fires to some degree having some impact. How much of that is right sizing, is rectifying when you look at what's happening now with the revenue and what our forecast is?
Yeah, I would say the Palisades fire was a big area that took a hit and also gave a lot of our credit agencies a lot of worry, right? And we're still in the beginning processes, right? We don't know what's going to come from that still, those liabilities, potential liabilities. But in terms of what we saw, we thought we would take a bigger hit on property taxes for this fiscal year, but we actually got some help from the state, a one-time funding, a little north of $20 million from the state to help with those hits to our property tax. But it wasn't as, I would say on the property tax revenue side as hard as we thought it would be.
A lot of this is, we've been seeing year over year, as you've mentioned, sort of the revenues declining or not reaching expectations, but the spending increasing. We call it a structural deficit.
Correct.
And you've outlined some proposals to address this. Which are the ones that you think are the most attainable that people should understand?
Sure, and that's a good point. Like even if revenues is on budget, it's this spending that's out of control. And my office has been sounding the alarm since day one, talking about overspending and the liability payouts. And unfortunately right now, the city is not doing much in terms of holding departments accountable who go over budget, right? Or the liabilities, the departments who commit the most liabilities. We don't see that accountability, even though we've recommended it, but I'm only one of 18 elected officials, right? It's gonna take more folks in City Hall, but I would say that's the hugest one, is the city council and the mayor need to actually sit down with these departments that tend to go over budget a lot, right size it, or figure out how to calm these spending down, or stop the liabilities. And the liabilities are good because if you stop the liabilities, then people also don't get hurt, right? Because that's also another thing too. So I would say that's a big one. I'd also say if we can move towards a 2-year budget, that'd help as well, so we can better analyze how we did in the fiscal year. Because the way it is with a 1-year budget, once the budget passes in July, we start creating the next budget a few months later, and it's like we haven't even started seeing how we did.
Well, it's just so interesting because liabilities come on the back of potentially like these police misconduct cases, but also slip and falls from streets that don't have lights, and this has become an issue in the mayoral election with Mayor Bassett and Councilmember Nithya Raman talking about it. I mean, you talked about a capital infrastructure program. I mean, there's not a lot of budgeting that happens for infrastructure, but the question is, where does the money come from?
Right, and if we actually did have a capital infrastructure plan, which is one of our recommendations, that would help tackle all these lawsuits and liabilities around broken sidewalks, street lights falling on people's heads, things like that, right? Our city is the largest city that doesn't have a plan when it comes to how do we want our city to be in terms of our built environment, our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, trees, and it's just mind-blowing because the way we tackle infrastructure in the city is we have hundreds of projects and we're like, okay, let's tackle this one, let's tackle this one, let's tackle this one. And there's really no efficient, effective way to make the city much better, right? And so we do need that capital infrastructure.
Yeah, we do. And you also made a point of this $950 million spent on homeless services, or at least the issue of homelessness in Los Angeles. And now LA City Council and the Housing and Homelessness Committee in particular is considering what to do with some $300 million for homeless services that would have otherwise, and may still, go to LAHSA. You conducted an audit of LAHSA, as did federal Judge David O'Carter and others, and it found that LAHSA wasn't tracking its funds properly. The county took its money. Now the city is thinking, do they give the money to the county? Do they do something else with it? Do they give it to LAHSA? I mean, what do you make of all of this? Because you've taken a look at some of this LAHSA spending.
Sure, and as the financial watchdog over the city's funds, the biggest thing that we need around homelessness is stronger and more proactive oversight and transparency. My office does some of that through our homelessness dashboard that we've created for the city. It shows homelessness spending in real time. It shows metrics, but it is very difficult to see how our investments in homelessness is actually doing, or what are we getting in return, because homelessness is outsourced right now, right? It's not in the city. And because of that, it's very hard to find the accounting. It's very hard to hold service providers accountable. We rely heavily on LAHSA. And so for anything what the city does, whether they pull $300 million or they put it somewhere else, all I care about, and what Angelina should care about, is we need to know where that money is going, and is there going to be proper oversight and safeguards over that? And that's what we're for.
Theoretically, one way to do that is for the city just to handle everything, but that's really difficult. That's why LAHSA was created. A judge said, look, we're going to create this thing to handle this stuff, but as you say, it's hard to see it. Your office conducts these audits, and it's one of the reasons why you were really concerned about a charter reform proposal that would have rearranged some things with financial oversight in the city. The city administrative officer would have become a chief financial officer, city financial officer, essentially. And you said that this reform would have taken some of your authority. Just talk about why that is and where we are with this charter reform.
Yeah, sure. So two things about the charter reform. Basically, the city wants to create a chief financial officer, CFO position. And I would credit it because of me. Once I got into office, our office has been sounding the alarm that we need a CFO. And then all of a sudden now we're creating a CFO.
Well, we need to know what we're doing.
Right. And number one, what the charter reform proposal was last Thursday was to create the CFO position under the mayor and city council. And it would have essentially done a lot of the duties that I do. It would have done audits. It would have done controls for fraud, waste, and abuse. It would have done things around payments, around accounting, around revenue forecasting, things that we were doing. Right. And the weird thing was, it came out on Wednesday evening, and I only had less than 24 hours to organize to stop it. Because even though they didn't mention my name, it literally said, create this position under the mayor and council that would do literally everything I do, right? And so luckily, over 2,000 people gave public comment in person, over Zoom, through emails, and stopped it, right? It was a mass organizing effort. And I would say second, what did end up happening is the status quo. They are going to create this CFO position, or the charter reform did recommend it, but it will just stay the same. It's the CAO handling it, right? Yeah. And nothing changes how the city handles its finances. And that's why we were advocating for us to do it, because we have CPAs, we're financially qualified, and we accountable to the people, not to the mayor or city council.
Well, it's very interesting. Chief Administrative Officer is accountable to the mayor, correct? I mean,
correct.
That is part. So that's part of the conversation. That's Matt Szabo. He's come on the show very often. He was fine with getting that audit power. He said he wasn't taking anything from your office, or the CFO wouldn't. It'll be interesting to see where it all goes, because remember, all of this could potentially wind up on the November ballot. But as you say, you had some success in advocating for the way you wanted to see it come down. It's great to have these conversations with you, because we need to know what's happening with these audits. Thanks for coming and answering these questions.
Of course, you're welcome.
City Controller Kenneth Mejia. Obviously, a lot to talk about when we are seeing Los Angeles and the finances, and what might be ahead for voters in November as well. Stay with us. Much more coming up. We'll be right back. Today, President Donald Trump fired Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary. The president was reportedly unhappy with some of her answers during 2 congressional hearings this week. But Noem had also come under scrutiny for her department's immigration crackdown, including the deadly shootings of 2 American citizens and her remarks after those killings. Evan Kosloff reports.
President Donald Trump announces that he's dismissing his embattled Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and marks the first shakeup to his cabinet since he came back to the White House last year. Nome has been the face of the president's controversial immigration enforcement crackdown. Democrats escalated their calls for her dismissal after federal immigration agents shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis in January.
This was an act of domestic terrorism.
She then falsely called the 2 dead Americans domestic terrorists.
How about an apology for what you said about their loved ones?
My heart is with them.
At congressional hearings this week, both Democrats and Republicans repeatedly bashed her.
Under your leadership, Ms. Nome, a disaster.
She was also criticized by some lawmakers for spending $200 million on a border security advertising campaign in which she played a starring role.
It troubles me.
Nome on Thursday defended her time as secretary, saying they made, quote, historic accomplishments to make America safe and secure the border. The president has now nominated Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, a Republican from Oklahoma and a former mixed martial arts fighter, to replace Nome. Spectrum News caught up with Mullen on Capitol Hill less than an hour after the announcement was made.
It came at not a complete surprise, but it came at a little bit of surprise for us. And so the president and I, as you guys know, we're great friends, and we get along great. I look forward to working with him in his cabinet. Of course, we still got to go through this little thing called confirmation.
Kristi Noem is gone. Good riddance.
Democrats on the Hill welcome Nome's dismissal, but are calling on the president to change policy as well. Since last month, Democrats have blocked funding for DHS unless Republicans agree to rein in the aggressive conduct of immigration agents.
No one person can straighten this up until the president changes the whole agency, stops the violence.
Now, Mullen is expected to get enough votes in the Senate to be confirmed as the new secretary. As for Nome, the president says she's now on her way to become the special envoy for the Shield of the Americas. That's a new security initiative for the Western Hemisphere he plans to announce on Saturday. Reporting here in Washington, I'm Evan Kozloff, Spectrum News.
Well, lawmakers and analysts from both sides of the ideological spectrum have been sharing their takes on Nome's firing on social media. There were also some comments about the nomination of Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma to lead DHS. President Trump's former communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, wrote that Nome lasted for 37.2 Scaramuccis. One Scaramucci is a non-scientific measurement of 11 days, the amount of time he lasted in the first Trump administration. The group of conservatives and former Republicans that make up the Lincoln Project posted about Nome's late dog, Cricket. In her 2024 memoir, she wrote about shooting the dog because it was, quote, untrainable. Governor Gavin Newsom posted about Nome's potential successor, Mark Wayne Mullen, saying he, quote, could not remember if we were at war this week. That comment came during a press gaggle this week. Here's a clip of the interview Newsom's referring to.
This is war, and we're taking out the threat. And if you're part of the threat, then you're a target.
You'll concede this is war.
We haven't declared war. They declared war on us, but we haven't.
War, Secretary Hicks said
we haven't declared.
Just now, you said this is war.
They've called it war.
They've called it war. What I was saying. Okay, well, that was a misspoke. What I was saying that they've declared war on us, but war is ugly. It always has been ugly.
Newsom's post also references a Senate hearing in 2023 when Mullen challenged the president of the Teamsters Union, Sean O'Brien, to a fistfight. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont talked him down. Well, the House blocked a bipartisan measure which was intended to require congressional approval for further military action in Iran. The Israeli military expanded its strikes in Lebanon as well as Iran. The Iranian regime continued its retaliatory strikes across the Gulf and warned that the United States would regret sinking one of its ships. Chris Welch reports.
The concurrent resolution is not adopted.
A day after a similar scene in the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House Thursday afternoon narrowly failed to pass a war powers resolution that would have reined in President Trump's ability to act in Iran by forcing him to seek congressional approval on military action.
It would have been a very dangerous gambit to take the commander-in-chief's ability away to complete this mission.
They were going to hit us if we didn't hit them.
The president commenting on the war in front of the Inter Miami soccer team at the White House Thursday, hours after he gave a phone interview to Axios in which he said that he has to be involved in the appointment of a new Iranian leader to replace the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Trump also telling the outlet that Khamenei's 56-year-old son is, quote, unacceptable, and added he's a lightweight.
The United States will ensure that whoever leads the country next, Iran will not threaten America or its neighbors, Israel, anybody.
You and your team have delivered nothing short of devastating, precise
strikes.
At Central Command headquarters in Tampa, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth praising Admiral Brad Cooper, who told reporters that in the last 3 days, U.S. bombers have taken out 200 targets inside Iran. And he says Iran's air capabilities have been significantly hampered.
Ballistic missile attacks have decreased by 90% since day one. Drone attacks have decreased by 83%.
The administration has said the operation could last for weeks, but some experts have raised concerns about a limited supply in U.S. and allies' missile defense stockpiles. Hegseth pushed back.
We've got no shortage of munitions. Our stockpiles of defensive and offensive weapons allow us to sustain this campaign as long as we need to.
No, we are waiting for them.
Also Thursday, Iran's foreign minister telling NBC News not only is he not afraid of U.S. military boots on the ground, something President Trump has not ruled out, but he says Iran is in fact, quote, waiting for them.
Because we are confident that we can confront them. And that would be a big disaster for them.
Earlier in the day, an Iranian cleric called for the shedding of blood, both from Israelis and President Trump, in a message airing on state television. Plumes of smoke could again be seen over Iran's capital city Thursday. Meanwhile, Israeli tanks were seen heading to the border with Lebanon on Thursday as fighting between Israel and Iranian proxy Hezbollah escalates. And explosions could be seen over Beirut later Thursday night as Israel's military ordered people from all the city's southern suburbs to evacuate. Chris Welch, Spectrum News.
As the war in Iran rolls on, there's a question as to the political goodwill the Trump administration has on this. As of yesterday, CNN poll found around 60% of the U.S. public disapproves. At the same point for the Iraq war, it was about 70% approve. More coming up. Take a look at the stock market, and that Dow Jones Industrial price has sent a lot of heads turning, but it stands to reason coming out of a war effort in which 60% of the American public is not on board. Investors also have some concerns about what it might mean. 784 points down on the day. California and 23 other states sued the Trump administration over new tariffs. They're aiming to block President Donald Trump's use of the Trade Act in 1974 to justify the levies. In the lawsuit, state attorneys general argued the president's use of Section 122 of the Trade Act is not meant to be this far-reaching. Take a listen.
Again, Section 122 is an obscure law that has never before been invoked. It's never been relied on before, ever, in its 52-year history. It relies on an outdated system of currency exchange that we don't even use anymore, which means it's entirely irrelevant in this case.
Even if allowed, it would be valid for 150 days, so there's some questions about timing and jurisprudence. The plaintiffs in the lawsuit are also seeking refunds from any amounts raised under Section 122 of the tariffs. There's still a conversation about the tariffs from the so-called reciprocal tariffs, a refund conversation that is yet to be resolved as well. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Issues. I want to thank LA City Controller Kenneth Mejia for coming on, talking a bit about Los Angeles' finances. Thanks to Melanie Mason of Politico, Bureau Chief and Playbook co-author, for talking about the governor's race. And as always, thank you for your trust and your time. See you tomorrow. Have a good night.